Welcome to Camp, Hike, Live, the podcast devoted to helping you learn, enjoy, and explore the great outdoors.
Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Camp, Hike, Live. My name is Nathan Harrington, and I am joined, as always, by the joyful Christopher Hiller. Christopher, how are you?
Today, I am full of joy, just like you said. How are you doing?
That's a word.
It is.
We had to have a discussion about that. Okay, so what are we doing today? What's the episode about today?
Today, we're going to talk about going stoveless out on the camp and the trail. I think it's a good topic. There's every season you hear about all the big wildfires that happen, mostly out west, but they happen all over the place. And going stoveless is one way you can help remove yourself from that equation, or maybe even in dry times when the winds are high or there's a high fire thing, you can go out and enjoy camping, you can go out and enjoy hiking, but yet you're taking out that element. And I would guess, and I'll let you chat about that a little bit, takes a little weight off when you're doing some hiking.
Oh, it absolutely does. But before we get into the episode, into the nitty-gritty of that, what's new with you? What's going on with Christopher?
Well, the newest thing with me is the National Guard, which I've let some people know that I'm in, has taken me away. I had to do some training, so that's why it's a little refreshing to get here and chat with you again.
We've missed you. We have. At the Viking household, not being able to chat with Chris it's been really hard.
I had plenty of Army folks to chat with, but it left me technology-less for a little while, and now I'm back, and I'm happy to be talking about what I love, which is the camping and hiking. So anything new in your world?
The development of I want to choose a good word. I don't have one. A terrible two. I mean, that is the word for it. In the last month or so, my son Asher has just really taken to some terrible thing. You know, his favorite word now is no. He's hitting, he's scratching, he's biting. He'll just run around. I mean, he's very verbal. He puts together full sentences. He speaks very, very well. And he always has. But now he'll just throw out gibberish and yell and scream and wave his hands in the air.
He's defining his personality. You get to mold that. You should.
Well, I hope this isn't his personality. He's a crazy child at the moment. I hope that this is just a stage, and then we can look ahead to the time when he's not a complete terror. But hey, I'm trying to enjoy it.
Well, if my child is any example for the future, it does get better. However, mine was very awesome at 2. It was we'll say terrible 3s. The 3 is when he got all defiant, and so you're maybe a little ahead of the curve.
Yeah, well, and then the way that Sharon and I have decided to make our family is having our children very, very close together. So we have Asher at 2.5. Henry just turned 1. So maybe when Asher gets old enough, Henry will bust right into the terrible 2s. As one goes out, the other one goes in. And then in January, we're having our 3rd, Troyer. So he's going to be following directly in line. So it's kind of scary to think about how we're always going to have one in diapers. We're always going to have one as that toddler. And, we wanted them very close together so that they could be a tight group of siblings. But I think that we're kind of
so they can wrestle and beat each other up and break things.
Yeah,
blame it on
absolutely.
each other.
Well, and they play sports together, and once we are done with diapers, we're done with diapers. We don't have to have a kid like 3, 4, 5 years later and bring the diapers back into the equation. But this podcast isn't about diapers. What am I talking about? Let's get into the meat and potatoes, as we like to say, of our podcast, and that is going stoveless. So if you're going to go stoveless, what do you suggest? Like, what are some reasons why you may do it, or maybe reasons why you have to do it?
Well, I have a few reasons to do it. One of the first ones I hinted at with you is, I think for you and your hiking world, folks, and me too, I do some hiking as well, just not as much as you do, is it takes away some weight. You don't have that fuel. Stoves themselves are relatively light, I would say. It's the fuel that really adds the weight to it. And I would say it's probably around what would you guess, around a pound, maybe 1.5 pounds total?
Depending on your stove, you could have stoves. Like if you do a more elaborate, like a jet boil system, which you may see camping more, but you do see it a lot in people's hiking packs. Yeah, they're 1 pound to 2 pounds, even if you've got a lot of fuel, depending on because some people carry some extra pots and stuff like that. But down to even less than 1 pound, I've got a stove itself that's only I think it's 8 ounces or no. The stove itself is less than that. It's like 3 ounces. It's crazy light. But it's like you said, it's the fuel that weighs more. And then it's not, when you get into the very light stoves, they're not as effective in heating up the liquid. So you lose a little bit on the convenience and how quickly you can make your food.
Yeah, I sell basically 2 styles of stove. And this is where it's good for this podcast is I sell a different style of stove to the campers than I do the hikers. And all of the hiker stoves are very small. I think the heaviest hiker stove that I sell is maybe an Optimus that's like 8 ounces. Otherwise, they're like 5 ounces, 2.5 ounces. They're super light, and it's fuel that has the weight. Under the lighter load category of going stoveless, I do want to throw in a couple precautions. If you're going to go stoveless, I recommend that you still bring matches or a lighter. You're going to need that for safety, and at least one like metal mug or something like that. You can go light, and the whole purpose of going stoveless helping is under this category is a lighter load, but you still want to keep the matches, the lighter, and a mug maybe.
Yeah, because like you said, you're mainly removing the fuel from the equation and potentially a bigger cook pot. If you do have a cook pot that's a little bit bigger. Another thing that it really helps with for maybe some long distance hikers and stuff, it's a time save. You don't have to spend time cooking. You'll notice that, and a lot of thru hikers use it as a comfort thing. You get done with a long day of 20 plus miles of hiking, and you get your camp set up, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, now I get to, for lack of a better comparison, watch TV. You know, it's your entertainment, it's stuff. So they don't mind spending the time cooking their food and enjoying it. But if you're on a tight time frame for some of these long distance hikers, they want to minimize that amount of time. Going stoveless can be quite a bit faster.
You transitioned perfectly into my second heading, which was more time on the trail, more time in the camp. You have no setup time for your cooking gear. You have no waiting for water to boil. You don't have to rehydrate your dinner. I mean, there's a huge time saving there. And in the campground, it's not as big a deal, but I would guess for all of your hiking, just like you're saying, that's gigantic, especially when you want to get to sleep. You have what you call your hiker midnights, and that comes earlier than actual midnight. So
right, because you're working off daylight. Not all hikers. A lot of hikers are hiking into the night now, night hiking and stuff. But when you're working with the daylight, you're minimizing the amount of time when you're stopping to cook, especially if you want to cook lunch and heat your lunch. That's a decent amount of time that you're using to cook your food. And a lot of the cold camping, a lot of the meals and stuff can be prepared and eaten while you're moving. I spent so much time hiking on the trail and stuffing food in my face while my legs are still going. So you really can save time. And it makes, if you're doing a distance hike, it makes resupplies so much easier because you don't have to worry about where am I getting my fuel. If you're doing a longer hike, maybe a couple weeks, it becomes logistically hard to find places to get off trail that potentially have and sell the gas that fits your stove, or it's the right size, or because there's different types of gas for the stoves. If you're doing an alcohol stove, there's just a lot of things to it. And really, you're just stripping away complications and simplifying the process.
I went out and did a little test of this just because I wanted to know, do you really save time and how much is it? And I guesstimated that you're going to save between 30 and 60 minutes by getting the water boiling, by rehydrating your food, by cooking it to the right temperature. I'm guessing that's 30 to 60 minutes, and that's every meal. So in a hiking world, that could potentially be 2 to 2.5 hours that is yours to do whatever, to prepare, to pack, to set up, to tear down, to get moving. So, and the other piece that I wanted to touch on that you briefly overviewed was the cooking varieties. You could go stoveless, but there's kind of what I call the transition period between stoveless. Everyone thinks when you're talking a stove, you're talking about your gas and your fuel that we're talking about. There are some stoves out there that you can purchase that use the materials of the woods, like your kindling, your little sticks and your things. And those are a lot lighter. Those are usually basically frames that you add kindling to, or you add little sticks and your little leaves to, and you can cook off those. So that's an option too. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about going stoveless and not having any sort of cooking apparatus with you.
Right. And then I think those are a little bit of a, I don't know. It's something people, they get into because they like that they're using them, because they're really not very efficient in heating food. Not that they don't do an okay job, but they're definitely less efficient than other options. And if you're hiking there's a good chance that you're not going to have a good supply of fuel, whether it's wet outside. So if you really want to get into that because you enjoy it, I could see that. But unless you're having a lot of fun with it, I wouldn't really recommend people going with those types of wood-burning stoves. I actually had a question on our YouTube channel from a lady asking if she could do that as a reliable way of cooking on a through hike of the Appalachian Trail. And I had to let her know. I was like, you're going to have opportunities to do it, but as being reliable and every day expecting to find dry wood for your stove, not only is it wet the majority of the time you're out there, but most of the campsites see thousands of hikers a year. Finding firewood at a campsite that is visited by thousands of hikers is almost impossible. They pick through the majority of the burnable wood, so it's not a real good option for people. But anyways, back to the topic. You had talked about you may be able to save as much as 2.5 hours. And I was doing some quick math. At our fastest hiking pace, we could hike like 4 miles an hour. So that's an extra 10 miles a day potentially for a distance hiker. So now I can really see why these guys that are doing because there's a really competitive world out there now for these distance hikes for like speed hiking different trails. And they're hiking 40, 50 miles a day on average. And most of all of these guys are going to try to do something like a stoveless. But let's bring it back to the camping side. Why might a camper want to go stoveless? We understand for a hiker all of the benefits, but how about for a camper? Because it doesn't seem beneficial for a camper to do it to me.
Well, it's a lot of the same reasons that you as a hiker would go stoveless. One is convenience. Sometimes when you're doing, especially what I call your trunk camping or your car camping style, a lot of times what you're doing is you're just there for the night. You're there to get ready, to set up your tent, go to sleep, and then maybe move to your next location. You may be traveling across a state. You may be staying in like a rest stop or wayside rest or different places where you're just camping for the night. So you may want to be stoveless just for convenience of, hey, we'll get out, we'll get established for our evening, and then we'll get up and go right away in the morning for a lot of the same reasons. Another one of the reasons you may want to go stoveless is because if you're running a hub and spoke style camping event.
Say what?
A hub and spoke camping style is when you have a main camp where you have all of your important items, such as your stove, such as your grill, such as your tent, and then for the day you go out in a different spear or spoke to a different direction. And every day it could be a different place.
Yeah, my wife and I do a very similar, kind of like what you're saying when we travel. We make some trips. We live in Pennsylvania. We make some trips to North Carolina every year and to Virginia for trail days every year. And these are multiple day trips, especially with young children. And we put together a camper we call the Hotel on Wheels, because for the first couple of years we stayed at hotels and we found that camping could save us considerable amount of money. And when you take a trip like that, yeah, it's not so much for the enjoyment of camping, but it is for the convenience and the money saved for us to not have to stay in hotels. And cold camping on those trips really does make it more convenient because it's about getting to a destination and not so much about sitting by a grill at a campsite.
Today's episode is brought to you by
Come see Camper Chris. He's got all you need. A camping guru, outdoor buff, your expert on stuff. He's also camping out in social media. So come see Camper Chris.
One of the other main topics that I have that I want to make sure we talk about when we talk about going stoveless is the amount of odors. Like the camp odors from being stoveless are so much lower. So for example, when you pull out your meal replacement bar or your dried fruit, your tortilla, and we'll talk a little bit about food in down the road here, but when you pull out those type of things, you don't have this scent that is wafting down the trail and over the campsite. It's confined and it's leaving the odors really confined with you and what you're eating, and it doesn't waft out and attract animals or different.
Yeah, I wonder the science behind that, because I think you're right. When you're cooking food with a fire, not only the smell of the fire, the smell of the gas, the smell of, I wonder how much it increases the smell of the food. It definitely does. You think about it, someone you're walking into a house that's doing a bunch of cooking, and it's like, oh, it smells great cooking bacon or whatever. And walk into that same house when they just poured a bowl of cereal.
It's whole different.
You know, it doesn't make any smell. But animals are a little heightened on their smell, but it definitely amplifies it when you're cooking for sure.
Well, and then I've read so many of the blogs and I've listened to obviously your YouTube videos of your hike. And one of the things is all of the hikers seem to say that their sense of smell increases. They know if there's perfumes in the area. They know if somebody's a day hiker and cooking this food. So obviously it makes a difference.
We can smell day hikers a mile away. It's so incredible. We could literally be walking down the trail and we go, I think I smell a day hiker. And like 2 minutes later, here they come. It's really quite fun. But let's jump into one thing before we get to talk about the food and the different things that you can take out for your stoveless adventure. Why are some reasons that's kind of like cons? Why wouldn't you want to go stoveless? What are the things that you're giving up?
I think the savoriness, is that a word?
Oh, that's
we're going to
definitely
use
a
it
word.
for this podcast. The savoriness of the food goes away with stoveless. I mean, you could still have some hearty and full items such as your peanut butters and maybe some dried chicken or something that has some protein and some value, but you don't have that saliva producing food when you're going stoveless. Things are just tend to be a little different.
Yeah, and I think that it's the comfort of it as well. There's no warmth. You know, and here's one thing to think about when going stoveless. It may be something that you'd be more interested in doing in hotter months. I see a lot of people out there in the summertime, they'll cut out the stove because they don't feel the need for that warmth. I'm a big coffee drinker. It's one of my favorite things on the trail is different ways of, I've got a espresso maker that I can go camping with, so I can make espresso on the trail. Though I don't take it very often, I have that option. I love different ways of making coffee, and the warmth of coffee is the one and only reason why I have never went stoveless, is because I like it so much. It's so much a part of my camping experience and my hiking experience. So, you know, you can't have cold coffee, I understand, but it's the warmth that people really, to wake up and to make warm oatmeal, or before you go to bed to have a warm bowl of ramen noodle soup, you know. So I think that is a big thing that people miss out on.
Yeah, there's just something there's a reason man evolved, because we got to control fire. And this is one of those things where we're deciding not to control that fire. And one of the real reasons, and this is maybe an American style, but I get to be really gluttonous when I have my stove. Like if I make we'll say some stew or something on the trail, I eat every drop, and I might even lick the bowl. Where if you're stoveless, you get halfway through one of those replacement bars, you can wrap that up. That's not going to rot on you. It's a little bit more shelf stable, and you can throw it back in your pack. You can't do that when you're cooking your food on a stove. Is once it's cooked, you have to eat it. You have to wash out that pan to get going. So that's one of the pros/cons that comes with going stoveless, is you get to store that food. But it's kind of a con because the cooked food is, you get to lick the bowl.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be ups and downs to the whole idea. And that's why we're talking about it on this podcast. I know from my hiking and camping friends, they love to really dive into the logistics, the gear, and what they're going to do and what they're going to pack for each of their adventures. This is just another bit of information that you can put inside of your box and use, hey, this is what's an option that you can do.
We've hinted at a lot of the foods, so let's get right into talking about the foods, as our podcast is getting a little long on time, but we want to hit the foods when you're going stoveless. So we'll start with, what was your favorite, or what is the staple that you have to have when you went stoveless, or when you decided not to cook?
Well, I haven't really went stoveless on the trails, but I have eaten a lot of food that I know can go stoveless. And as far as breakfast goes, it's as simple as you switch out oatmeal for Pop-Tarts. You switch out oatmeal for Pop-Tarts. For a hiker, calories are important. I've got probably an unhealthy addiction to Pop-Tarts after hiking the trail. There's something about them. Maybe it's the addictive properties of preservatives or whatever. I don't care. They're delicious. But I definitely think Pop-Tarts are a good option for breakfast. For me, for lunch, we substituted with like wraps.
Yep.
Doing a lot of wraps and stuff like that. And then meat and cheese are two things. So if you can do meat and cheese with like a loaf of bread, we actually did that on the trail quite a bit. If it's not too hot, the cheese doesn't really get too kind of the oil starts to come out of it and stuff. But as long as it's cooler temperatures, you can do that and pack it. Those are some of my go-tos.
Yeah, I wrapped a lot of those in with our tortilla, the tortilla.
Tortilla. I don't know.
Exactly. However, whatever part of the country is in the proper way to
Tortilla.
say, those for me became a staple when I went stoveless. Obviously, peanut butter. I'm a big peanut butter guy, but like you said, you can put salami. You can put basically anything you can think of. You can put on there, and it makes for a good sandwich type meal. It doesn't get crushed in your pack. Doesn't get crushed in your bag. You skipped over it, but I actually like those overnight oats, like those quick oats. Those are good cold. You can put those in water, even if you don't have a stove and heat them up. You can put them in water and rehydrate them.
Here is something that we haven't talked about yet that I think is very, very important. When it comes to going stoveless, you actually do not have to eliminate any of the food. Any bit of food that you would take with a stove, all of the rehydratable meals can be rehydrated with cold water. That stew that you were talking about, you can rehydrate that and eat it cold. And here is a hot tip. Was I doing hot tips? I think they're called hot tips. Here's a hot tip for you. Make that meal at lunchtime, rehydrate it. So you take your stew at lunchtime, you're eating some tortilla with, here's a go-to for Sharon and I, tortilla, peanut butter, raisins, drizzle a little honey on there and wrap it up. That was something we ate a lot on the trail. You're eating that for lunch. Now take some water, dump it into your soup, your stew, seal it back up, and then put it inside of your jacket and finish your hike. When you go to eat that at night, it will at least be body temperature, and if it's cold outside, will feel warm to you. It will not feel like it's cold. Use your body heat to heat it up. It works.
That's a fantastic hot tip.
Told you,
fantastic.
Hot tip.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One of the things that you didn't, and I kind of left it off because I thought you were going to bring it up, ramen noodles. Those are great when you're going stoveless.
I've seen people eat them without hydrating them, like crunchy snack.
Eat them like a cracker.
That's disgusting.
I may or may not be one of those folks. I may or may not be. My son is addicted to ramen. He thinks that's the greatest food on the planet.
Oh.
We limit him, but otherwise he would eat, like, you get like a whole case for like $1.25. And he would eat the whole thing if we'd let him. But those are really good because they pack well. If you break them up, that's kind of okay if they're in your bag or if they're getting thrown around in your trunk as you're doing your camping. But ramen noodles are high on my list for campless or for stoveless foods.
Yeah, ramen is really good, and I going with that tip of using your body heat, you can still get it to a decent temperature where at least doesn't feel cold. But yeah, I wanted to make sure we touched on the fact that all of the food that you can rehydrate on the trail, you can still use cold water for.
And to just wrap up the whole food conversation, I want to end with what I love and maybe one of my favorite things about going stoveless is it feels like you're snacking all day. For example, you just grab those bars and you keep those handy. You grab like, I don't know what you call it, like jelly beans. I really like jelly beans because they're high sugar, high energy. You bring those along. To me, it's like you're constantly snacking all day, and I kind of like snacking. Snacking is fun.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of the traditional hiking and camping foods that doesn't require a stove. You're talking snacking. You've got granola bars. You've got your trail mix or your, what do they call it? Group? No.
Gorp?
Gorp. There it is. Group. What? But yeah, you've got, those are two staples.
Camp in a group if you can. Hike solo, right? In that
group. So there's those. And then if you want to break out into some of the, we are doing some more of these really long distance kinds of things. There's a lot of energy. Like you see them in ultra marathoners, like the energy gels, or maybe people that do long bike rides and stuff. A lot of those are making the transition into hiking. They don't need to be heated. There's a variety of those. I like how you said it, snacky foods. Go to the snack aisle in your grocery store. Those are things that you eat cold that you take out onto the trail. And the only thing that I look for is hearty ones, things that can take a beating without getting crushed into a powder. But I have seen people take like their favorite kind of potato chips. They buy them and they smash them up into little pieces and then eat them with a spoon.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. Do they put water on them to get them like a mush or a mash, or they just eat them dry?
No, they don't put water on them. What are you talking about? That would be the grossest thing in the world.
You got to remember, I'm in the Army. I see some strange things when it comes to food.
Watered down, smashed up. Can you imagine like Doritos watered down and smashed up.
Hey.
But if they were warm.
I say smash them down, put some water, throw in some Tabasco. It's a good meal. There you go. We're going to leave you with a quote today. If you can cook it at home, you can cook it while camping, unless you're going stoveless. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
If you like what you have heard today and you want to hear more from us about camping, hiking, and living the outdoor life, we ask that you subscribe to our podcast, share it with your friends, and help us to keep coming to you. If you'd like to join in on the conversation, you can do that on Facebook. Search Camp, Hike, Live Forum.